What is in a lithium battery? Today's topic for discussion brought to you by the news that yet again another car carrier ship is burning in the middle of the ocean. These seem to be happening about once a month now, and we don't know all the details yet, but we do know that another brand new electric vehicle sparked a fire that can't be put out, and some 3,000 plus cars are going to be destroyed along with the ship, and a tremendous amount of pollution created in the process. Fortunately, from what's reported, the crew are safe. They have done what we will come around to in conclusion is the only thing you can do, which is escape from a lithium battery fire. So a battery in general is a chemical device for creating electrical energy. Inside any kind of battery there's an electrolyte, which might be a gel or it could be a liquid. This is a fluid or a media that assists in ion flow from the anode to the cathode in the battery, and essentially encourages conduction. Conduction is current. Current is what makes electrical devices work. So in the old-fashioned lead-acid battery, there was a sulfuric acid compound that reacted with the lead plates and thus created this flow of ions. In a lithium ion battery, and this applies also to lithium ion phosphate batteries, the electrolyte is essentially it's an ester. I like to joke that an ester is acetone on steroids, but essentially this is a chemical name for what we would call, in layman's terms, an alcohol. I think the most common one is probably ethylene carbonate, but propylene carbonate is used in some lithium batteries as well. Both ethylene carbonate and propylene carbonate, whether you add phosphates to them or not, are volatile. They burn. I think ethylene carbonate has a flash point of somewhere around 300 Fahrenheit. When they burn, they are toxic, and the fumes are hazardous. Essentially, you don't want to be near a burning lithium battery. And firefighters, of course, know this, and wear a breathing apparatus anywhere near this kind of fire. There's a couple of important things to note. So this electrolyte essentially has lithium salts dissolved in it, and that's what makes the magic happen. If you remember high school chemistry, lithium salts, when placed in water, burn, or more appropriately, rapidly oxidize in an exothermic reaction. So if you take lithium salts and drop them into water, you'll get a fizzing volcano. Some of us may or may not have tried that in high school chemistry and been taken to task for it. So you have these salts dissolved in an alcohol. If that's sounding like a dangerous situation, you're on track here. I can tell you this, that when a military ship goes into a military shipyard, if it has large output, large capacity lithium batteries, they are treated with the same caution and respect as the military ordnance, the missiles and the explosive ordnance are treated. In other words, they're warehoused and cared for in a way that recognizes this potential explosive or flammable nature. Now, I've been in the passenger boat business for 35 years, and in that business I can tell you that when things go wrong, when there's a tragedy or an accident, there is an extensive analysis done, You hear about this all the time in the airline industry, right? You know, the NTSB gets involved when there's a major accident in any mass transportation. And we're no different in the boat business. We take an accident and we forensically pull it apart and learn from it and try and go forward, changing regulation to see that it doesn't happen again, or that the chances of it happening again are minimized. Some years back, there was a really bad dive boat fire in California. I believe the loss of life was somewhere around 27. That fire was later deemed to have been originated at a device charging station where lithium batteries failed in the charging process, started a fire, and a number of people were trapped and killed. In the process of rule changing with the Coast Guard, the normal scenario would be that the accident happens, it's analyzed, the lessons learned are publicized, and the public, or those of us in the industry, are solicited for input as to how to best protect the passengers within our industry. And rules are changed, rule proposals are made, or change proposals are made and sent out for comment. Economic evaluations are done. The interesting thing about this case was it was the first time in 35 years that those proposals came out and said, we're interested in hearing what you have to say, but this is a done deal. These changes are taking place regardless of objection from the industry or impact on the industry or financial impact. It was essentially an open and shut case where the Coast Guard said, we have one way to move forward with this to see that, or to reduce the chances that it happens again, and that's what we're going to do. If you want to know what the one thing they came forward from that with as an absolute, it was escape. If you speak to any firefighter, there are some great YouTube channels that you can find. I think one of my favorites is What's Going On with Shipping, Sal Caligliano. There's also Stashed. These are both firefighters, professionals who have a lot of knowledge about either this specific issue or about shipping. They will both tell you the same thing, that in the event of a lithium battery fire, there is one and only one thing that has to be a priority, and that is evacuating personnel. There are means you can take. There are fire suppression systems. It's relatively known and acknowledged that they're going to fail, that a lithium battery fire extinguishes when it runs out of fuel. So back to the original question of what's in a lithium battery and why does this happen? Well, you've got an alcohol, and if you put water on an alcohol fire, unless you cool it below the flash point of the alcohol is going to continue to vapor off out of the solution you've created of water and alcohol. That vapor is going to continue to burn. So essentially, you need to deplete the vaporizing alcohol from the fire. Once you do that, what's left are the lithium salts that were in the alcohol solution. They are no longer in the alcohol solution, they are now in water. As we noted earlier, lithium salts in water rapidly oxidize, aka burn, and produce an exothermic heat reaction. Hence the reason why most firefighters will tell you that they can put 30,000 gallons of water on a burning EV and still not quite be sure that it's safe to approach. But there are a lot of reasons why people will still want lithium batteries, and that's understandable. I'm not a hypocrite. I have a propane system right behind me. That propane system was installed with certain precautions that are recommended in the industry, but it's not 100% safe. I think I would quote here the great Captain Bob Douglas, recently crossed the bar, a man I was really honored to have a chance to work with. When he was having trouble getting the schooner Shenandoah through the Coast Guard regulations after he built her in the 60s, he was quoted in the National Fisherman in an article as saying, "The only true safety comes with a halo and wings." Cheers, Captain Douglas. So he pays your money and he takes your chances. We're each captain of our own ship. I'm not telling you not to use lithium batteries. I'm not telling you that they're not better than lead-acid batteries. Lead-acid batteries, under the right conditions, can produce explosive hydrogen sulfide gas. What I am telling you is to understand your choice. So first and most obvious is understanding what's in that box. The next question that you would encounter, just as you would with a propane system, is placement. Where are your lithium batteries? Are they under your main companionway? If those lithium batteries begin to burn, do you have another way out? There's pretty much no boat built that doesn't have both a companionway and a hatch that a person can fit through, generally at opposite ends. That's not an accident. What concerns me are a lot of boats that I see that have one companionway and one large forward hatch, over which is very well secured for sea, a tender or a dinghy, which means you're not getting out that way. Again, not telling you not to do it, just telling you it's something to think about when you're making your cascade of decisions through the process. Where's your emergency equipment? Is your life raft stowed right above your lithium batteries? Probably not a good choice. There's recently a really sad case of a couple that were found up on Sable Island, and all indications are that they had a battery fire and had to escape the vessel in their tender rather than their life raft, and they perished. So lithium batteries are highly touted because they have a capability for much higher charge and discharge rate from lead-acid batteries. They can accept a higher rate of charge for a larger part of their charging cycle. In both directions. They can discharge at a very high rate. I have these little jump starter, boost starters that I use or carry on board. They used to be fairly large and bulky, but they're pretty handy if you or somebody near you needs to get their engine started because their batteries have depleted. You can very easily transport one of these and deliver a high amount of amperage to get an engine started. They've gotten smaller and lighter, more compact, but as you'll see with this one, which is 4 years old, they have a problem, which is that eventually that lithium battery cell starts to break down. Now the better ones will last longer and are less likely to break down, but if you look at this one, you can see, and I've had the same thing happen with phones and other small devices, that what happens is that there's an internal failure within the battery and it starts to bulge, and it becomes very apparent by the device actually bloating up like a tick. That's your warning that you're about to have a catastrophic failure of that battery and potentially a fire. So my question for you is, if you have, say, 400 amp hours of lithium batteries stashed under your quarter berth, how often do you look at them? Are you aware if they start to bulge or if some failure starts to occur internally? Or is it going on and you haven't looked at that battery in ages, so you have no idea? Just like you have to check, monitor, add water to lead-acid batteries, you need to be aware these aren't put them in and forget them devices. Lithium batteries work differently. They have a relatively flat voltage profile. By flat, I mean the range of voltage from dead to fully charged is very small, might go from 13 to 13.5 volts. Lead-acid batteries, in contrast, typically will operate anywhere between 11.8 and 14.5 volts. They can go down to less than 11 volts, but when you get down to that range, you're probably doing permanent damage. The point to all of that is that you can, at a glimpse, know with a relatively inexpensive and relatively simple voltage meter what your state of charge on your lead acid battery is. Voltage is almost a useless indicator in a lithium battery bank because it's not going to change that much. It'll probably change more with a large appliance switching on than it will between full and dead charge. So one of the first items that is going to be impacted by that on my boat anyway would be right here, the isotherm refrigeration system. This particular system has been running non-stop for over 20 years. Fantastic system, isotherm ASU, or automatic speed up system. It essentially monitors battery voltage constantly. If the battery voltage exceeds a threshold, in this case I think it's 12.6 or 12.8, it will speed up, hence the ASU. It'll go into a higher speed of operation, and it will freeze the entire holding plate from top to bottom. In a sense, it's taking excess energy when the solar panels are at peak, or the wind turbine is making more power than the batteries need, or the engine starts, or you plug into shore power. Any of those things will elevate the battery above the threshold and will cause the unit to realize that it has power available that the batteries can't store. The unit will then take that power and store it in the form of enthalpy, freeze the holding plate. So you have this ability to reduce your need for stored amp hour battery capacity by this unit essentially taking advantage of otherwise shunted off power. That system isn't going to work for a lithium battery bank. The lithium battery will be completely stone dead before you drop below the threshold. This is the reason why I believe Isotherm no longer even makes this system. They have a new controller, and the new controller probably has ways to mimic this function, but again, with a very shallow voltage change profile in a lithium battery, you essentially are going to be storing all of your refrigeration power in your battery, not some of it directly in your holding plate. And with any form of energy, the conversion from one form, battery power, to another, cold, involves a loss. So it will not be as efficient even if your battery can handle the extra load. Over here we have my little inexpensive portable freezer refrigerator cooler thing. This is basically a compressor cooler. You can get these on Amazon now for somewhere just north of $100. And these units are far simpler than the isotherm. However, they do all have a voltage cutoff threshold, so you can say, don't let this thing kill my battery. And you can decide to let the ice cream melt overnight rather than run your batteries down below whatever you set them at. Again, you're not going to take advantage of that with lithium because it's voltage based, and the lithium battery bank voltage, if you were to use that feature, the freezer would be shutting itself off all the time or never until your batteries went to zero. So how do you know all of this? Well, again, a lead acid battery system allows you to use an inexpensive voltage meter. I actually have them all over the boat, so I know at a glance what my charge state is. But on a lithium system, the only real way to monitor your charge state is with an amp hour meter. Now, these are neat devices. They never worked particularly well with lead acid batteries because the capacity of a lead acid battery will diminish with time. So your 100 amp hour battery this year might be a 95 amp hour battery next year, and 90 or 85 the next. Simple truth is lithium batteries will do a better job over a longer period of time of maintaining their rated capacity. And by the way, that rated capacity will be far more true. A lead acid 100 amp hour battery cannot be used for 100 amp hours of work. You generally only get about 50%. The lithium battery can be used for something close to the rating. So with a lithium battery system, you need one of these amp hour monitors. It's the only way to know how much juice you've got and have used. The problem with that is installing an amp hour monitor requires that every single electrical device be run through it. So if you have an existing system on an older boat where a particular item, say a bilge pump or a propane sniffer or any of a number of things that you might want to be on all the time, if those are run through a circuit that has a direct battery connection, not through your main circuit, then you don't know what power is going out of your battery. That's an untenable situation for your lithium battery bank, because it's essentially like giving somebody a checkbook without a register to your account. You're both writing checks, but you're the only one keeping track of the numbers. Eventually, the numbers don't add up. They don't reconcile. So you're looking at needing a more sophisticated monitoring method for a lithium system. Charging is different. I mentioned that lithium batteries will accept charge at a higher rate, and that's fantastic. If you're running a generator or an engine, you can run them for less time to achieve the same amount of energy storage. If you're using solar or wind, well, those are catch as catch can anyway. You get what you can harvest from the environment. I think solar is probably the best mode of charging for lithium banks, just in terms of the way it's controlled and functions and works. The wind turbine generally is voltage monitoring if it's self-regulating, although I understand that some of those now are far better in their circuitry and are able to handle lithium than the older ones were. The older ones tended to shut off, check voltage, then turn on, which is a very different thing if it's blowing 10 knots and you're producing 10 amps than if it's blowing 30 knots and you're producing 40 amps every time it switches on. You can probably tell that sort of sawtooth charging profile is it's just not going to work well with a lithium battery management system. Using an alternator to charge gets interesting. Alternators, for the most part, are rated with the lead-acid battery charging profile in mind. In that profile, the maximum charge output of the alternator is only going to be accepted for a short period of the charging cycle, and the charge cycle very rapidly tapers off as the voltage of the battery rises. So everything about that alternator, its cooling, its windings, its gauge of wire, everything in there is really geared toward a shorter period of its maximum output. So if you put a 100 amp alternator on a 400 amp hour battery bank, first of all, you'll never get 100 amps out of it unless the batteries were stone dead, and then it would only happen for a very brief period of time. But essentially, if you put that same charging system, that same 100 amp alternator on a 400 amp lithium bank, and that lithium bank wants the 100 amps, it'll take it. The problem is the alternator isn't going to be too happy if it's taking it for an extended period of time that it wasn't designed for. So most of the time with a lithium bank charged from an alternator, you're going to want temperature sensing on the alternator to regulate how much power it puts out. You're going to want the temperature of the alternator, maybe the temperature of the batteries as well, to dictate the charge, not the capability of the alternator. So very different system. A lot of folks will do a battery-to-battery charger, and that's an acknowledgement of the fact that a lithium battery has an all-powerful, all-knowing battery management system. If something happens that it doesn't like, its reaction is to completely go to 0 volts, open the circuit, isolate the battery, prevent Chernobyl. If you do that with an alternator connected only to that battery, you have just destroyed the alternator. The diodes cannot handle an open circuit. So one of the solutions to that is to essentially charge your lithium battery via a wet battery or a gel battery. In other words, charge the gel battery from the alternator, charge the lithium battery from the wet battery. That's okay, but you're asking the wet battery to pass a fair amount of current, or you're limiting the charge that you'd get to the lithium battery, which kind of negates one of the advantages of higher charge rate in some ways. So energy density is probably one of the biggest advantages touted for lithium batteries. Absolutely true that the amount of energy storage per pound of lithium battery exceeds that of lead acid batteries. That's indisputable. And if that's your primary goal, then this technology is going to be a big advance for you. To put numbers on it, a lithium battery typically can store about 500 BTUs per pound of weight. Now, why am I using BTUs as a number? Well, that's because a lot of people will advocate, once they do have a lithium bank in their boat, getting rid of combustion fuel cooking, going over to essentially induction cooking or resistance cooking. And certainly that's an advantage if you're designing the system from scratch. Just to put some numbers to that, my 18 pounds of propane in a 20-pound cylinder will last about 3 months on Charis. That 18 pounds contains 378,000 BTUs. So doing the math, I use about 4,200 BTUs of heat per day on average to cook. That's about 8.5 pounds of lithium battery per day. So, a decent-sized lithium battery bank, yeah, you probably could use that for cooking for a fair number of days that the sun doesn't shine. That's really the answer. How much reserve storage capacity do you want to have or need to have in between your charging? Keeping in mind also, though, and one of the reasons I say this is best undertaken as a system replacement rather than a partial drop-in, a 1500 watt heating element burner, say a cooktop, that's the equivalent of 5,000 BTUs, or about one stove burner, that's going to want 125 amps of 12 volt power. So you're not feeding that with small wire cable. This is something that really has to be thought through. Even if you're using it through an inverter, you're still talking about a serious amount of electricity moving through the boat. So yeah, propane is about 21,000 BTUs per pound. Lithium, again, about 500 BTUs per pound. Diesel fuel is about 19,400 BTUs per pound. So if you are looking at lithium for a propulsion method, and there have been a number of successful installations for that, my 20-gallon diesel tank would contain about 390,000 BTUs of fuel total. My diesel burns about 1/3 of a gallon of fuel per hour. So I have about 60 hours or 300 nautical miles of fuel range. That same amount of energy would require about 780 pounds of lithium battery. So obviously that's not happening. But, in full honesty, you trade off a lesser range with lithium propulsion for either going at a lower speed or having more means to recharge than just going to a fuel pump. Again, it's not a drop-in. If you try and do a drop-in, you are essentially becoming a sailboat with a minor means of propulsion. Not that there's anything wrong with that. My good buddy over at How to Sail Oceans, Kevin Boothby, he is a sailor. If he were to go to a lithium electric propulsion system on the Ruth Avery, it would just be a whole lot easier than the ash ore that he uses now as auxiliary. So if you're going from nothing to electric, you're going to love it. If you're going from diesel to electric, you're going to have to learn to sail a little closer to the purists. One of my passenger boat clients has a neat little boat that was built originally with a triple expansion steam engine then later converted to its current diesel engine. And he thought, with good reason, that this would be a pretty cool boat to do an electric lithium battery conversion on, having jumped the span, so to speak, twice through 3 eras of technology. The issue with this boat, as with many others, is that it can only carry a certain amount of weight and still meet passenger vessel stability rules. And the boat's maxed out. It can't carry any more weight. So unlike a road vehicle that can be 25 or 30% heavier than an equivalent ICE engine vehicle, and just wears the tires out a little faster, a boat is very often weight limited. And so when I looked at this project, that was the first thing I determined. The next thing was to do some numbers and figure out, if we removed the diesel engine and the diesel tanks and we installed electric engines and lithium batteries, what was the equivalent range. So with the diesel power and the fuel tanks that the boat has, I determined that this particular boat could conduct 180 passenger excursions out onto the Great Lakes before it had to go and refuel. That's a lot of operation time. That's a lot of trips and a very small time to recharge. Unfortunately, in order to keep the weight identical, the current best energy density for lithium batteries was going to allow the vessel, without gaining any weight, to do approximately 1 trip. And I say approximately because it could well be that that could be extended by shutting down propulsion at times in points in the trip where you were stopping and explaining something, whereas the diesel engine would have been consuming fuel throughout. So the problem was that the energy density did not allow this particular boat to continue to operate in a financially viable way after the conversion, given the current potential of batteries that we have. So that was the end of that. So cycle life and cost are another touted advantage of lithium batteries. People will say, well, you know, your lead acid batteries are only good for about 3 years if you use them in any great amount, and I find that's about accurate. And they say, well, you know, your lithium battery bank, given the same number of annual cycles, might last for 10 years, or you know, frankly, if you were basing it on cost, the lithium batteries would have to last about 30 years. Maybe they will. You know, the battery cycles in a lithium battery, they haven't been around long enough for us to know if they're going to last 30 years. But here's what I can tell you. Again, what's in the battery, right? We know there's this dangerous stuff in there. The dangerous stuff in there is kept at bay by this magic little box of beads called a BMS, Battery Management System. A battery management system is made up of electronic components on a board. When was the last time you met somebody who thought their cell phone was going to last for 30 years? In fact, I think most people start to distrust the reliability of their communication/entertainment device after about 2 years. So now consider that you're buying into this relatively expensive technology, partially based on the analysis of life cycle, that it could potentially last 15 times longer than your iPhone. And the consequence isn't that your phone works slowly or drops a call or loses internet access. The consequence is a fire that can't be extinguished. So I'd ask you this: if you're going to tell me that I should go to a lithium-ion battery bank instead of lead acid for greater longevity of the battery bank, what is the acceptable longevity of the BMS that keeps that battery bank safe? Well, again, I'll go back to my professional hat, and I can tell you that From the dive boat fire, the new regulations emphasized escape. We talked about that. But the already existing regulations for the installation of large lithium batteries emphasize replacement of the battery management system. So essentially what they're saying is the circuitry that prevents this from becoming dangerous should not be relied upon for any longer than the typical cell phone circuitry. Now that's fine if you're using an external BMS, but if you're buying a packaged lithium-ion battery with an internal BMS, which is pretty much all of them, you're probably not opening that battery up to change out the BMS every 2 years. Let's be honest. I do believe I think Clark on Temptress talked to us about one lithium battery that is designed to be able to be opened and serviced. But it's a rarity. If there is one, it's the only one. Most of them are pretty much sealed at the factory. Use them and get rid of them. So that gets down to the last point. Use them and get rid of them. When I swap out my lead acid batteries after 3 or so years, if I don't bring an old battery in to trade for the new battery, I get charged anywhere from $25 to $50 core charge because they want the old battery for recycling. Translation: that battery, even though it's reached the end of its usable lifespan in its current incarnation, has recyclable, reusable components. The lead, the acid, even the plastic box in a lot of cases is reused when they rebuild batteries. Contrast that with a lithium battery. Let's say that you go to order a new lithium battery right now and you try and figure out how to get rid of the old one. I'd encourage you to just look into that process online. What you're going to find, and this is true even of small device batteries, is that it's relatively difficult to find a place that will even accept these batteries because of the danger of handling damaged lithium batteries. You hear about transfer station fires all the time that occur because someone chucked, this old jump starter unit into a dumpster and it got crushed by an earth mover and created a fire. So lithium batteries, I'm not saying they are not recycled. What I'm saying is that they are expensive and disadvantageous to recycle. It's a net loss to recycle a lithium battery. That is not true of a wet lead acid battery. So taking it all into account, never say never. I mean, we're surrounded by lithium batteries. I'm coming to you now through devices that are powered by lithium batteries. Will I say that I would never install them in the boat that's my home? No, I wouldn't say that at all. No more than I'd say I would never install propane when I had alcohol cooking to start with. But would I think that I could just drop them in place and go on my merry way toward a happy existence with twice the energy density? No, that's a dangerous and definitely a misconception that people need to avoid. You really have to think this through from one end to the other and take in as much information to your decision factor as you can. For now, my solution's easy. All of my lithium products can be picked up and thrown overboard. And that's the way I'm keeping it until I've figured out something better or until we've happened upon a better technology.